How do you create a legacy of grit?
You know, when I wanted to go do something or have an adventure, my mom would say, okay.
How do you inspire your kids to do hard things?
It's flipping the narrative of we always do the hardest things first.
My guest today shares why it's so important for your true success to be able to work through hard things. I'm thrilled to welcome Phil Case to the Mean Grit Podcast.
Welcome to the Mean Grit Podcast. I'm your host, James Julian. We're here today with Phil Case, friend, president of Max Connect Digital. It's great to have you, Phil. Thanks for being here.
Good to be on.
You and I met. I was a guest on a panelist, and you were the moderator. So I'm excited to kind of flip the script here, ask you some questions, and dive into this. Today, we've hiked up about 1.5 miles, 2 miles up a beautiful canyon to talk about grit. And so I'm curious, just first question out the gate, what is your definition of grit?
You know, I think about kind of steadiness.
Okay.
In my career and life, there's always unexpected storms, and you don't know what the outcome is on the other side. But I would just say that kind of quiet assurance, that consistency of effort, knowing that what you're working toward, it will all work out in the end. Maybe in the way you imagined or you didn't. But I think it's just that steady unweariness.
Yeah. And how do you create that in turmoil? And maybe is there a time that you faced a challenge that you thought it's not going to work out, but that steadiness allowed you to fight through?
You know, it's interesting. I think a lot of it's created in our childhood. When I think about my parents and, you know, when I wanted to go do something or have an adventure, my mom would say, okay. I'd say, really? You're green lighting this? It's like, you realize I'm going to cross like 3 major intersections. It's 3 miles, and like, that might be dangerous. And in today's standards, no mom would ever let them do that.
Yeah.
But I think that streak of, I can do this, and independence, and just that self-confidence of you can do anything you put your mind to, I think starts as children. And I just, you know, as a kid doing hard things in mountains, and, you know, that's kind of carried with me. But I don't know if there's a single moment that you would say, that's when I developed grit.
Yeah.
But in terms of moments that it was manifested, you know, a couple in my career at my first agency, there was a time where, you know, I had been out of school just 3 years.
Yeah.
I'd started as an intern, went full time. The president of the agency left. And, you know, we had some restructuring and went from 12 to 13 people down to 4.
Wow. And
the owner of kind of the holding company's like, what do you think? Like, what should we do here? And it was pretty tenuous. It was, you know, this thing may not pencil. And I, you know, as he sat me down and said, you're kind of the highest ranking person we have. And
3 years out of school.
Yeah, I was like 25, 26. And I just said, you know, we either go all in or we go home. Like, we don't want to do this thing half baked. And we brought on a partner who was just amazing and had some good, steady experience. And he and I spent the next, you know, several years at Fluid, going from, you know, a handful of people to 36 and growing to 5 million and becoming recognized all over the country. And so, I mean, there was some really hard moments in there, and sleepless nights and sleeping at the office. And, but in the end, it just, you know, we had a vision for the future, and we wanted to work through it.
That's awesome. And I think that is a testament of that grind and pushing through. Now, on the way up, we were talking about our families, and family is a big thing for both of us. And you mentioned creating that grit in childhood. And we've talked a little bit about how we're doing that for our children. So I'm curious, what are things that you do to try to create a resilience in your family life?
Yeah, I think some of it begins even at home. You know, when kids it's easier to watch TV than, you know, to do chores or to practice the piano or to do your homework. And it's flipping the narrative of we always do the hardest things first. You know, I wake up every morning and my kids see that I'll wake up by 6 or 6:30. You know, I'm in our home gym and I'm consistent with my wife, and she's the one with the real grit. Yeah. But we're always doing those hardest things first. And it was interesting. I have a 14-year-old, and as we were talking about, you know, doing something hard, you know, getting up in the morning and motivating sometime, you know, a teenager's hard. Yeah. And we went and climbed a mountain on skis, you know, doing a little bit of backcountry skiing. And he had woken up at 5. We got home, And it's so interesting. He didn't have school that day, but he was the most productive kid that you'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And it was like, my wife's like, who is this kid?
Yeah.
And it's because he had already done the hardest thing he knew he had to do that day first.
Yes.
So I think it's starting there. You know, I was telling you about my 10-year-old who last year said, I want to hike Timpanogos. And I'm like, I don't think you're ready. But then he did.
Yeah.
And now he's convinced he can hike any mountain in the world. And I just think it's giving them those moments where it's pushing them just outside their boundaries of comfort. That's where the real growth comes. And I love the saying, there's no growth in the comfort zone, and there's no comfort in the growth zone.
Yeah.
And you got to get yourself and your kids just a little uncomfortable.
I really like that. And I think it is those moments in providing that opportunity. I think of my own family. My wife and I haven't always been the active get up and go. It was easier to binge watch a TV series at night, or eat a pan of brownies, on a Sunday evening, and we've seen a transition as we've changed our lifestyle, and our youngest will just start doing burpees, and she's like, I'm going to do a workout, and I'm like, where is this coming from? And then I have those moments where I'm like, oh, it's because I'm changing my lifestyle, and she sees me running every day or doing this every day, and it's setting the, like, this is the standard. And as you continue to raise that standard with your family, it comes.
Love that.
We were talking about, trying to find that balance between pushing your kids and maybe pushing too far. Are you willing to share that story with us about skiing?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is probably the worst dad moment ever. But we've decided years ago to be a ski family. I remember one day, I said to my wife, let's go teach the kids how to ski. And at the time we had 3, and they were all like 5 and under.
Yeah.
And she's like, okay. And we go up to Alta Ski Resort and get to the Bunny Hill, and here's 3 kids that have never skied.
Yeah.
And it was the next 2 hours of just train wreck, screaming, crying. And I finally said, look, this isn't working. And I did 1 kid at a time per year, and then eventually we got all of us out kind of skiing. And the youngest came, and we were at Alta when he was 4. And, he had done a couple of lessons and took off the edgy wedgie. And I ended up on the Bunny Hill falling on him with the edge of my ski and my full body weight across his femur, and screaming and crying. I convinced him he was fine to ski down the rest of the mountain. And realizing something was wrong, I carried him to ski patrol. We get him in the car to a clinic, on the ambulance to Primary Children's, and he's in a full body cast for 7 weeks. And for me that was a devastating low. And seeing him in a wagon, totally dilapidating for weeks. And when he came out of that and learned how to walk again, because he was learning how to walk, I just thought, I don't know if I could ever take him skiing again. And then that next year he kind of perked up and said, I think I can go again. And he was cautious, and he had his edgy wedgie on, and we did some smaller things. And then there was one day the edgy wedgie broke, and we were at Deer Valley, and he was on the mountain and just said, I can't do this. I'm going to break my leg again. This isn't possible. And in that moment of extremity, I kind of just looked at him and said, I got you. And I've never seen such courage. I mean, more than I've ever had. And he went and did some things that were harder than he could have imagined. At the end of that day, he said, Dad, like, that was really hard for me. But he said, now I know I can do hard things. And he is, as our youngest, I mean, he has just this streak of like perseverance that you've never seen, and just this fire lit within him. And maybe some of it's credited to that experience.
And it's so hard, because as a parent, you never want to see your kid go through those type of things. But then hindsight, you're like, well, it wasn't the worst thing.
It's those harder moments that define character and really, push you to who you can be.
And that's the reality of grit and being able to do hard things, is just that you have to experience it in order to do it again and again and again. And there's no way around it. And that's probably the hardest thing. I think I realized this as I continue to meet with people and talk with them about this. Themes continue to pop up. And one is that once you do the hard thing and you make that a habit, then it becomes easy. but it's hard to get started. But once you're going, it's easier.
So a mentor of mine that's been an adventurer and travel all over the world, he encouraged me to read The Comfort Crisis.
Okay.
And that book I love because it talks about, not only do we live in a comfort crisis in this generation, but if you look back to our forebears, they lived in discomfort. They were scavenging for food, they were on the go, and we were always meant, physiologically to have that level of almost imminent danger.
Yeah.
And it allowed us to evolve and push ourselves and advance as a generation and a civilization. We don't have that per se today.
Right.
And you see the anxiety, epidemic and everything else that, has affected this generation. And the solution isn't just getting outdoors, but he talks about every single year, every one of us should have, and I forget the name of it, but go on a journey, plan an adventure, and the odds of survival should be 100%, but the odds of completion should be 50%.
Yeah.
And you should do something that's harder than you've ever done previously, and you should push yourself. And even if you don't finish it, that year, that's okay.
Right.
But you'd be, and what he kind of proves out statistically is you're going to be more successful than you think. You think the odds are 50%, but you're going to accomplish it more often than not.
Yeah.
Because we can always push ourselves. The Marines have taught us just a little further.
Yeah, I love that. Who's that book by?
We're gonna.
What's the title?
The Comfort Crisis.
The Comfort Crisis. We're gonna look it up. It's gonna be in the description. So go get it. I love that philosophy and that mindset because you're absolutely right. I want to know what's a grind that you have right now, something that you do on a regular basis that you can't miss, that you got to do.
I, growing up and, in my early adulthood, I was very much just mountains and running and climbing and marathons and mountain biking and all things kind of cardio in the mountains outdoors. And a couple of years ago, my wife said, I'm going to start working out with this personal trainer. And I thought, whatever. And she's like, do you want to join me? And I'm like, no, I don't do the gym. I've never lifted. I'm not interested. And she's like, fine. And after about a week, I thought, she is going to be stronger than I am. And I started to get worried. So without going to the trainer, I just started to follow her program.
Yeah.
And after a couple of weeks, the trainer's like, why don't you just, try to submit? And that was about almost 3 years ago.
Okay.
And it is like a drug now.
Nice.
And I still do a lot of outdoor and, kind of backcountry type stuff, but I love to lift weights.
Nice.
And I never thought I would. And it's something that I'm in the gym 5 days a week, and it's usually an hour. And, for me, there's a satisfaction there and, a dopamine that comes from doing really hard things and progressive overloads and seeing myself, embrace something that I previously was really uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
And for me, my kids are, I think they see that of like, oh, Dad didn't used to do it, but now he does. And anyway, it's been fun to kind of learn, kind of a whole new skill set and kind of weightlifting.
I love that. I love the example of, hey, I'm going to try new things even at different stages in my life. And just that example is also just fantastic.
Well, it's interesting. If you want to be humbled, I have a good friend that probably 8 years ago, I had skied, quite a bit.
Yeah.
And thought I was a decent skier, surely a black, not a, true expert. And he said, hey, do you want to, skin up a mountain with me and backcountry ski? And I said, do what? And he said, yeah, you just put skis on. I'm like, well, wouldn't you slip backwards? He's like, no, there's a whole system. And so he's like, I got an extra set, come with me and a bunch of buddies. And we go climb up across the street from Alta Ski Resort up Low Cottonwood.
Yeah.
And I was totally humbled and I felt crippled. And I thought, whatever I've been doing wasn't skiing if this is what skiing is.
Yeah.
And that for me kind of, set off all of the warning bells and of course my wife's mind of avalanche danger and what's possible. But it has become a passion, that I followed to different continents and, did a 7-day adventure in the Swiss Alps and,
cool.
Summited to Zermatt. And it's been so fun for me to go. I find that I climb and summit more mountains in the winter than the summer now.
Wow.
And so that for me was a paradigm shift too, where I did something that I thought, I was good at.
Yeah.
But then, I realized that I quickly went back to like beginner novice status and you're still kind of working through that. So
It's so funny you say that. I've joined this run club on Wednesdays, and I was first invited by a 23-year-old college kid, and I thought that would be the people I'd be most worried about. It's the 50, 55-year-old guys who just live in these mountains, and
they have real grit.
Yeah. So those are the guys that I aspire to. But
so, and just along those lines in business, so I was in Phoenix. We just opened an office down there, and was moderating a discussion at a lunch similar to where we had met. And this individual named Brent Veach, he owns like 55 Del Tacos. He's the largest franchisor in all of Del Taco Kingdom.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think he runs basically, representing the franchises nationwide. And I didn't know who this guy was. And after interviewing him, I just, he and I have met up subsequently. And even though he doesn't need the money, it's not about the money, it's not about, achievement. He just loves the grit. He loves to get up. He loves challenges. And I've begun to realize, I used to think, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I'm really looking forward to retirement, and I want to work really hard to retire. I don't necessarily want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Only because if life is without challenge and without something that's around the corner that you're maybe a little worried about, that pushes you to a level of uncomfortable. I mean, I look at those individuals in their 40s and 50s, and they can run circles around me because they've just developed those habits and discipline around. They're willing to do the harder things that sometimes, the flashy entrepreneurs aren't.
Right.
So
it's so true. I love this. This has been a fantastic conversation. But a couple of rapid fire questions to wrap up. And I'm trying to remember all of these off my mind. But do you enjoy the journey more or the peak?
It's funny. I would say in my early 20s and early 30s, it was about achievement.
Yeah.
And I want to be on that fast 40 list and 40 under 40.
Yeah.
And for me now, I think it's far less about the achievement and it's about the relationships.
Okay.
There was we just went and saw at Hell Center Theater, The Prince of Egypt, for a second time with my kids a couple of days ago. And there's a song, and it talks about how will you measure the life of a man.
Yeah.
And there are some lyrics that just kind of haunted me that I just loved that said, how will you measure the life of a man? Is it what he gains or what he gives? And as I look, back in my last kind of 20 years and look forward to my next 20 years, I don't know if it's about gaining more. I don't know if it's about, achieving more.
Yeah.
I think it's about giving more. And, early in my career, it was about being an Olympic athlete. I wanted to be the best, to be recognized, to make more money, to move up the ladder. And that mentality shifted for me years ago where I kind of want to be an Olympic coach. Who am I training up? Who's the next set of leaders? How can I get out of the spotlight and help them develop and flourish? And so I think for me, I'm so excited for the next 20 years. And hopefully I'm slowing down in terms of, busyness and schedule, but I can be on more of that mentoring and giving and sharing and hopefully being able to, leave a legacy where others are better for it.
Love it. Morning person or night owl?
Morning person.
Morning person. Do you prefer, in your company's hiring, would you rather have talent or somebody with just a hard work mentality?
It's interesting you say that. I would always go hard work. We have 4 core values that we kind of align against, and we will hire and fire on those core values. If, there's extremely talented people I've had work for me over my career, and those that don't exude the values of a company and organization, but also just the willingness to work hard. And I won't mention names. There's an individual in my agency currently who maybe didn't have all the talent, but his willingness and humility to become better, he has blown past everyone's expectations. And he's probably the most favored person to work with now.
Wow.
Because he has not only grown, but he's become a person that I think just is naturally so pleasant to work with and attracts others to him just because, he's always willing to give more.
Yeah.
In the right ways.
That's great. Would you rather have a success that you forget or a failure that you always remember?
I mean, I think we've learned that it's the failures that define who you are in life. It's interesting. I don't love to read a lot of fiction books. Most of where my focus is nonfiction.
Yeah.
And in business, there's, probably, millions of business books that I'll never read because I would rather read a biography. I'd rather understand what somebody did and where they, where the failures were and how they got back up.
Yeah.
And for me, that's where, true accomplishment is in life. And I've learned those that had the most challenging life. You look at LeBron James, and the reason he's a superstar isn't because he had everything handed to him. It's the exact opposite. He had an unfair advantage because of the amount of failures.
Yeah.
And you look at his son, Bronny, and he just doesn't have what his dad had, which was a really hard childhood with nothing. And he had to fight his way to the top. And that's why he became an incredible player. And so I do think if we, for our next generation and kids, if we give them too much, they will never, develop themselves and succeed in ways that perhaps, less fortunate individuals have.
Yeah.
And I think it's that careful balance, a blend of you want them to fail and then need to get back up again.
Yeah. Yeah. What is something that you do now that would surprise your younger self?
Slowing down, trying to do less. I think for me, I remember, in my career as trying to run and grow an agency, a 65-hour week was pretty common.
Yeah.
I strive for 35.
Nice.
38 hours a week. And there's weeks, I was grinding to finish a proposal this week and certainly working more, but I want to be at home more. And for me, I'm convinced that simply more time at work doesn't necessitate more, quote unquote, success at work.
Yeah.
It's working through others. It's being more visionary. It's being more intentional. And so one of my goals this year is to say, how do I actually cross things off of my calendar and actually take less meetings and do less?
I love it. I love it. Final question. What piece of advice has impacted you or that you would want to share with somebody that you're mentoring that would help them?
In terms of a piece of advice, I think some things that have surprised me along the way that when I traditionally thought of success, you think of somebody in a big house with a nice car that's at the top of the food chain in their company and career that's made a lot of money. And as I define success, no longer, I think for me, is it through the lens of monetary.
Yeah.
But the stories that touch me and, the mentors that have impacted me the most are sometimes, kind of very quiet about what they do and behind the scenes. They're not the people in front of the magazines. They're not the people you read about on LinkedIn that are self-promoting. But it's those individuals that do the most good, that are, a little bit more quiet, that are maybe sensitive to the needs of others. And sometimes maybe they're not the ones leading out in front, but leading from behind.
Yeah.
And those are the individuals that impress me the most, and that I hope, that myself and my kids and, others benefit by.
Yeah. Well, Phil, this has been fantastic. I appreciate it. I hope that you guys have gained something today and think about what you're doing in your life to create an environment where you're doing hard things. And I really appreciate it. This has been so good. And please like, subscribe, and anywhere you want them to come follow you or anything, or?
I'm fairly active on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Okay. So follow Phil Case on LinkedIn and have a great day. Talk to you later.
We'll see ya.